All right, I will call this Tigard City Council Local Contract Review Board and Town Center Development Agency meeting to order. City Recorder Krager, please call roll.
Councillor Newton.
Here.
Council President Lube.
Here.
Councillor Shaw.
Here.
Mayor Snyder.
Here.
Youth Councillor Nog.
Here.
Councillor Goodhouse.
Here. All right, I'll ask everyone to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, thank you. Councilor staff, any non-agenda items?
Nothing from us, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Let's see, we have no proclamations or recognition. We'll move on to public comment. Just in general, I want to make sure that if individuals that are here and present, members of the public, are wanting to testify on a particular item, we have a number of different public hearings tonight. Please make sure that you do your best to sign up for the public hearing that you wish to speak on. There are sign-up sheets for each topic at the back of the room. And with that, we'll move on to follow-up to previous public comment. Assistant City Manager Nyland, follow-up.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and councilors. Mr. Mayor, at the September 13th council meeting, we did not receive any public comment. There were no written comments, no one was in person, nor did we have any callers or anyone via video. And then I will do a quick fun fact, because tonight's fun fact was inspired by sports ball, specifically the Dolphins-Bills football game, when several players experienced cramps, exhaustion, and discomfort to, well, heat. Hurricanes, we rank those in categories 1 through 5, with 1 being winds between 74 and 95 miles per hour. Category 5 includes winds up to 157 miles per hour. Tornadoes, those 2 are ranked by categories, 6 different kinds. Those categories range from Category 1, being where winds are 65 miles per hour, to Category 4, that has winds with over 200 miles per hour. I mention these rankings because of our weather, specifically the heat. Heat waves are occurring more frequently across the globe, and these are the deadliest weather disasters in the U.S. Heat accounts for nearly 150 fatalities per year, more than hurricanes and tornadoes combined. There's talk about ranking heat waves similarly to what we do with hurricanes, with names and categories, in hopes to increase awareness, reduce heat-related deaths, and of course to improve sports ball. I want to give kudos to our team for being proactive and thinking about how we can better serve our community and prepare for these extreme weather situations. That's my report for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager Nyland. And move on to public comment, written public comment that was received before noon today. We received quite a bit of public comment about a couple different topics that are on the agenda. We received a large number of communications about the Recycle Plus program, and then we received 2 different written public comments about the climate-friendly and equitable communities parking rule compliance. We'll move on now to in-person public comment. For anyone that's signed up for in-person public comment that is general in nature at this time.
Mr. Mayor, we have no general comments.
No general comments. Okay. Mr. Nolup, is there anyone in the queue that's wishing to make public comment on a general topic?
Mr. Mayor, no callers in the queue.
All right. How about video testimony?
No video testimony either.
All right. We'll move on to item number 4 on the agenda, consent agenda. Consent agenda, we consider items that are routine in nature. Generally don't have a lot of discussion about them. I think tonight there's 1, which is the aquifer storage and recovery. 3, an ASR 2 well, house, and related system improvements. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion, Mayor. I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, and I believe, based on the note I received, we're going to be doing all votes by roll call tonight because of Council President Lube's attendance. Is that correct, remotely?
Yes, you could do that, or you could always call her by name.
Okay, so only she needs to, whoever's attending remotely needs to vote in a roll call vote in
Yes.
this situation? Okay. Let's see how this goes post-COVID times, semi-post-COVID. All right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in the room that are in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed in the room? Council President Lube, your vote?
Aye.
All right. Consent agenda is adopted unanimously as presented. We'll move on to item number 5 on the agenda, which is a public hearing to implement the Recycle Plus program and adopt new fees. I'm going to open the public hearing. Hearing procedures. Anyone that wishes to testify may do so by phone and may call to get in the queue now. 503-966-4101 is the phone number to do so. Of course, if you're here in person, you'll also be able to testify. And we have a sign-up sheet at the back of the room. At this time, we have Public Works Director Brian Rager will introduce the topic and turn the presentation over to other staff. Mr. Rager.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Good to see you in person. My name is Brian Rager. I'm the Public Works Director. With me tonight in a remote status is Assistant Finance Director Eric Kang. Tonight we have a public hearing to consider adoption of a resolution that would put in place expanded recycling services for the community. As the Mayor mentioned, I'll provide some background up front, and Assistant Director Kang will provide specifics as to the services proposed and the resulting rates. Our 2 franchise haulers are also represented here tonight remotely, and we will give them an opportunity to provide additional information about the program. As you know, this journey began several years ago as we were receiving inquiry from the community about expanding our recycling services, and there were some specific requests to allow the company Ridwell to operate in the city. And today, as has been mentioned, we've received numerous written comments from the community about the proposed expanded recycling services, including concerns and frustration that Tigard will not allow Ridwell to provide these services in the community. So we thought it would be important for the council and the public to hear some facts about what the city can and cannot do when it comes to solid waste and recycling services. So first, let's talk a little bit about franchise agreements and what they mean for the city. A franchise is basically the right to provide certain services in the city. And for solid waste and recycling, this is covered in Municipal Code Chapter 11.04. In that chapter, Section 11.04.040 spells out that exclusive franchises have been granted to Pride Disposal and Waste Management. And they operate in specific areas of the community, and they're not allowed to cross over boundaries, so they each provide service to specific areas in the community. The benefits of the franchise system include that each area of the community is served by one franchise hauler, and this minimizes the number of service trucks that roll through the neighborhoods, and that's good for our street system, it's good for the environment, it's also good for ratepayers because it provides for cost efficiencies in providing the service. As to the question of why Tigard cannot allow a provider such as Ridwell to provide expanded recycling services in the community, we have to look at Section 11.04.020B, which says, no person shall provide service, offer to provide service, or advertise for the performance of service without having obtained a franchise from the city. While the community was asking for expanded recycling services in the community, the two franchise haulers were working with Washington County on a proposed program. Now, this was a process that took about 2 years to get done. Given that both haulers are able and willing to provide the kinds of recycling offered by Ridwell, the city is obligated to allow them to provide those services. As you know, we followed closely the lead from Washington County on that issue, and this program is now operational in Washington County and has been since July of this year. Washington County has really taken a lead role on this in our area, and we know that other cities are looking to follow this model right now. We're not aware of any city in Washington County that has reached an agreement with Ridwell to allow the company to legally operate. At this point, I will turn the presentation over to Assistant Finance Director Kang, who will provide detail as to the services proposed and the rate information. Eric?
Good evening, Mayor Schneider and members of council. My name is Eric Kang, Assistant Finance Director. I'm here to present information on the services being offered by the Expanded Recycling Plus services and provide an overview of the proposed rate changes to the fees and charges schedule. As a refresher, the Recycling Plus concept was first introduced at the June 21st, 2022 meeting. The expanded service includes recycling of plastic film, such as bubble wrap, plastic grocery bags, food storage bags, and #1 plastic clamshells, textiles, and compact fluorescent light bulbs. The service will be able to begin as soon as November 1st, 2022. The rates for the Recycling Plus service is a flat rate of $2.55 per month plus $9.45 for each collection event, which in other words, $12 per month for a monthly pickup service. This rate structure allows residents to set their own collection frequency and save money if they choose to have less frequent pickup service. The rates for the Recycle Plus service was determined by a rate study with the city's independent consultant during the annual budget setting process for franchise fees. The city reviews profit margins of both franchisees annually to ensure that the aggregate profit margins are within the 8 and 12% range that is set in the Tiger Municipal Code, which these rates would fall within that range. And margins that fall outside of this range would require a new rate study and a recommendation for new rates. As Director Rager mentioned before, we have on the line representatives from the city's solid waste franchisees, Kristen Leichner from Pride Disposal and Dave Huber from Waste Management, provide additional information, answer any questions. And at this point in time, I'll turn it over to them. Thank you.
Yes, so good evening and thank you, Eric, and good evening, Mayor and City Council members. I'll go ahead and kickstart this off and just let you know the program, as was mentioned, was started here in Washington County, unincorporated Washington County urban areas as of July. There's 4 items that are included in the recycling service. There's the plastic film, the clamshells, as well as textiles and the CFLs, which are the compact fluorescent light bulbs. And there's a lot of benefits to having this program, for the city, for the residents in the city of Tigard. It's been a slow start, if you will, when it's really started here in July, but it's really started to kind of kick up, and a lot of participation has really started here in the past month and a half. Kristen, do you want to add anything to that, or?
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I think Brian and Eric and Dave did a great job of kind of giving the overview. I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have, but I don't have anything to add to what's been presented so far.
So, Mr. Mayor and Council, that is the extent of our presentation for tonight, and we're happy to answer any questions you have at this point.
And just to remind the council, we are at question asking point, not at deliberation, and we still have public testimony to get to. I guess I would ask both our staff and the haulers some questions about the communication I received as a community member in Tigard from Ridwell yesterday. Particularly, some of their critiques and criticisms and concerns were, number one, that this service is more expensive for biweekly service. I'm going to take it one by one. Can you comment on why that is and why you can't offer it at the same rate
Sure.
as Ridwell?
Yes, so a couple of things there. One, the receptacle that we're providing is quite a bit larger than the receptacle that is currently available by the other service provider. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison there. Also, the core materials that we provide services for, as Dave mentioned, are those four. And my understanding is at least one of the ones that we collect is an extra fee for the other service provider to collect. So again, it's not quite an apples to apples comparison. But the primary reason that we went with the rate structure that we did was to allow customers to really manage their own cost. I've personally been collecting film, plastics, and clamshells at my home for the past 3 months, and just in those 3 months, I have not yet created 20 gallons of waste of those two commodities, and that is how big our receptacle is. So really the service is designed to allow for up to every other week collection, but when Washington County rolled out their program, they did some surveying of some interested customers that wanted this service, and what they heard was that most customers did not need service more frequently than once every 2 to 3 months. So under that structure, most customers would pay most months just that flat monthly fee of $2.55. And then in any given month when they did have a pickup, if they had one pickup in the month, as Eric said, it would be a total of $12. So yes, if a customer had service truly every other week, it would be more expensive. But this service is really designed so customers can manage their costs based on how much material they're generating. So we truly don't feel that customers would be paying more under our program. And the other reality is that we provide living wages and good benefits to our employees. We don't have any gig economy workers, running routes through our service area, and so the cost to provide that level of employment is higher.
Now, what about the critique that fewer categories are included, including electronics and key add-on items like styrofoam are not included?
So some of those things come down to a little bit of logistics of how to collect them. They tend to be larger and bulkier. We at Pride have our recycling depot in Sherwood, where we have been a part of the Oregon E-Cycles program for over 10 years, where we take all electronics at our depot for no charge to customers. So that is, obviously it's not a collection option, but there is a drop-off option for that. We've always provided bulky item collection for e-waste for customers that might have that material to need to be collected and keep it out of the landfill. The styrofoam question is a little bit more complicated, and ultimately it comes down to a question of how styrofoam is recycled. The reason why when we first rolled out this program in Washington County, we did not have styrofoam as one of our primary items is because there are a lot of questions still out there about chemical recycling, which is how styrofoam is recycled, and what the environmental benefit of that process is, or alternatively what the potential negative environmental impact of chemical recycling is. And I am not an expert on that topic, but I know that the county has had questions about that, DEQ has had questions about that, and I think the jury's kind of still out on whether or not chemical recycling is a positive thing or a negative thing. So until we had more information on kind of the pros and cons of that recycling process and the environmental impact, we didn't feel it was the right decision to add styrofoam to our list at this point.
All right, the next criticism was that there's no reuse. Reusable items appear to be entirely left out of the proposal instead of a core part of the service every other week with Ridwell. What's the response to that?
So with reuse items, for Washington County's program, part of what was rolled out was a quarterly reuse option, and we're working with the county on developing that. In this initial rollout with the city of Tigard, our approach was to wait on that piece of it, just because we feel like there's still a few kinks to be worked out related to the reuse component. You know, which organizations would we partner with, how best to collect those materials, what the right frequency is. And so it's definitely something we're open to and would be happy to discuss further, but that's why in this initial conversation we did not approach it to include that, but it's definitely something that we are interested in doing moving forward.
And then what would the response be to the lack of transparency about where all the things are going that you're picking up to be recycled and reused?
Ultimately, I feel that claim is just entirely false. When we first did our advertising for our customers on this program in the county, we put a customer newsletter together that we put in all of our billing inserts that very clearly outlined where all of these materials were being recycled. As your regulated franchise service providers, we have to report where every pound of material that we collect is going, both to the county as the waste shed, as well as to the Department of Environmental Quality. So whether we're collecting a material that is going to the landfill, going to yard debris composting, going to recycling, we have to report where all of that material is going, and it is it's very highly regulated. So we are happy to share where those materials are going. I'm happy to do that in this meeting if that would be helpful, but we are not at all lacking in transparency related to where those things go.
Okay, thank you. And staff, this will be a last question for you. The closing part of the letter says, rather than moving forward with this garbage hauler plan, the Tigard City Council could choose to allow Ridwell to offer you a more comprehensive, less expensive service, just like the city of Portland did. It's better for their constituents and better for the environment, and they need to hear from you. And I'm curious to know from the staff perspective about whether that statement is actually true. And maybe this is a legal question for the city attorney. Could the city of Tigard City Council decide to do that?
Council, not tonight. That would require a code amendment, and we would have to come back at a later time after negotiating with the franchise haulers and amending our code to allow it.
Okay, so current code doesn't allow it.
Correct.
The council could give direction to work in that direction.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Other questions from the council? Let me go to Council President Lube first, since she's online, and that way I won't forget her.
I don't have any additional questions on top of what you asked.
Councilor Shaw? Youth Councilor Nog? Councilor Goodhouse?
No.
Councilor Newton?
Yeah, thank you. I read all the emails that came in, so I just have a couple of questions that I just like to go out there because I think there were some questions out there that I think folks want to have answered. So one of the things that was raised was it seems like other surrounding communities, Beaverton, Lake Oswego, Portland, are able to allow Ridwell to operate and we are not. So is our franchise requirements different? How does that work?
Yeah, Councilor Newton, I'm not aware of the status of other cities as far as agreements with Ridwell and how that compares to their solid waste code. For us, it's pretty clear to us that we can't allow another service in without there being a franchise. And then there's, as City Attorney Rahala mentioned, that that would require a code change for us. So, I don't know what the other communities, how they're doing it, what they're doing. They may have a different code than us.
And we're working with Washington County. Do we know if counties, maybe Multnomah County, Clackamas County, Washington County, the agreements are different, or do we even know?
I'm sorry, I do not know what their agreements are.
Okay. One of the other things, I had a couple of calls, and one of the other things that came out was the Pride and the haulers report on where the waste goes, but they're questioning the commitment of those companies to do what they can in terms of how they get rid of that waste. So they're reporting, but these were younger folks who are really concerned about, if I recycle, where is it going, and is it really, what's really going on. So I don't know that you can track that, but I wanted to make sure that was out there, because I did get a couple of phone calls from folks who transparency was the most critical thing to them. So is there any response on that?
Well, I think
the commitment to really making sure that we're doing what's in the best interest of the environment when we dispose of the waste. They're feeling like there's more of a commitment from Ridwell. I don't know if it's the way they message, but that did come up, and I thought it was important to bring that up since I did hear about that. Is that not
and
something
I'll let
you can address?
the two haulers respond to that if they'd like.
Yes. So good question. I will say that, the recycling material that is currently being picked up in Washington County with the Recycling Plus service, it is going to the proper end markets. That we utilize a local recycling facility here in Hillsborough. And they in turn take it to the proper end markets. Excuse me. I believe it's probably this. I think it's the same end markets that other companies might be using as well. So, but I would like to say, I would like to add that as the franchise haulers, our expectation, with the City of Tigers is to make sure that we report this material that is being diverted as recycling, which we already do with the mixed recycling and so forth. So this would be definitely an advantage for the city to see, these materials and how much volume of these materials are being collected by your franchised haulers, which I don't know if that'd be the case, the other avenue.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and would you mind if I added on to that, Councilor Newton? I just wanted to say that, really the development of the recycling programs in Tigard as well as throughout the metro region and the state have happened because of the commitment from the hauling industry to work with our local government partners to get recycling programs established. We started collecting source separated, you had to separate all your material in those red bins, your paper separate from your plastic jugs and things like that. And we really have worked together to help these programs to evolve and to, then we started carting the recycling to make it more convenient to keep the material dry, just keeping glass on the side. We've added materials to the list over the years, and, really that is because of our industry's commitment to helping advance recycling in the state, and that's part of why Oregon has such a strong recycling program compared to other states nationwide. And my company, and this is not just for the city of Tigard, but it's for all of our service areas in Washington County, but in 2021 we were able to divert almost 65 million pounds of recycling and yard debris from the landfill, and I think that speaks to our commitment to doing that. And we really think that this Recycle Plus program is just the next evolution in that partnership that we have with you to provide more recycling services to the community.
Thanks. Just two more quick questions. I've had a lot of feedback from retired folks that having to go to the depot to recycle things is not a good option for them. So one of the reasons they would like to Ridwell to be considered is they don't have to go somewhere to recycle things. So I go to the depot, but there's a lot of people that that's not really a good option for them. So down the road, as we progress, is there a thought about how we might be able to, serve those folks differently? Or is that, could you comment on that? Because that's a real sticking point for them. Going somewhere to recycle is not an option.
Yeah, what I would say to that question is, historically the hard to recycle items have been handled at depots, and that's typically because they can't go into the mix. Film plastics is a good example of that. Film plastics is highly recyclable, but if they end up in the mix with the other recycling, it gets wrapped around the machinery, and then that machinery doesn't sort the other things that go in the mixed recycling. So it's not that material isn't recyclable, it's just that it can't be mixed with the other materials. And so, historically we've used drop-off locations, but I completely understand the issue of, retired folks or people that, don't have, they depend on public transportation, might not be the best way to transport those things. So I think this is, again, kind of the next evolution. And while we have a relatively small list in the beginning, I think there is a lot of potential to add materials down the road. One of the things as we worked through this process with Washington County is we want this program to be responsive. If there is a new, strong, stable market for a material that's not currently on the list, we will come to you and say, hey, great, we have an option to recycle K-cups. I'm just throwing out something random that I can think of off the top of my head. So let's say there's a new market for the Keurig pods to be recycled. Then that's something we could come to you and say, hey, we have this market, it's stable, we believe in it, let's add it to the list. And on the other side of that, if we have a market for one of these materials that we're currently collecting that no longer exists, then we would come to the city and say, we no longer have a place to recycle this material. We want to be honest and transparent with our customers. We don't want to pick up something, claim it as recycling, and then not have the proper home for it. So this program is intended to evolve as these materials evolve and as markets evolve. And the state of Oregon last year passed the Recycling Modernization Act, and part of that has a producer responsibility element, which means that the companies that create these products that we use and this packaging that we use will have a financial role in helping make sure these materials are handled responsibly and recycled if they can be recycled. And so I think that whole system will essentially be implemented in 2025. There's a lot of rulemaking and things that have to happen leading up to that. But I think once that is actually implemented, there will hopefully be a lot more opportunity for some of these other materials to be recycled, because the brands will have kind of some skin in the game in terms of if their products are more recyclable, they in theory will pay less into the system. So that's a long-winded answer of hopefully soon. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I don't know if it's just me, but I can't hear you.
Well, that's because I didn't have my microphone on. I'm sorry. A lot of the emails that I read were expressing concern that the services aren't really comparable. That Recycle Plus doesn't offer a comparable service to Ridwell. So I think the mayor asked this question, but could you summarize really quickly what, maybe the staff would answer this, what you know the difference to be, and that'll be my last question. Thanks.
Kristen, I think you had a pretty good summary. If you wouldn't mind just going over your perspective on if there are differences between what the Recycle Plus program is offering and what others offer. If you could summarize that again, that'd be great.
Sure. So I think the first evolution in us making the effort to provide these expanded services is we added battery recycling to the curb at the end of the year last year. So that was a service that was highly desirable. It was part of this expanded recycling option. So we've been collecting batteries at the curb as part of the glass recycling since November of last year, I believe. And I'm sorry, I think I got that date wrong. I think it was a little bit later in Tigard. But we've been doing battery collection in the city for some time now at no additional cost to all Tigard residents. And that is one of the primary materials that has been part of the other company's program. And so the other materials that we're now collecting, while not completely comparable, are plastic film, number one clamshell plastics, textiles, and compact fluorescent light bulbs. So those are the four materials that are part of the overall service. There's no extra fee for those services if you're signing up for Recycle Plus. So it is a different model because it is not an automatic every other week collection. It is on call. But we feel, based on Washington County's surveying, that most customers would not need the service more frequently than every 2 to 3 months, which would allow most customers most months only pay a monthly fee of $2.55 per month. And then each time they did request a pickup, it would be an additional $9.45. And also our bin is a 20-gallon bin, so it's quite a bit larger than the other company's bin, allowing for more capacity and more time between collections. So while the services are similar in the sense that they offer service for hard to recycle items, the method in which the service is being provided is hard to compare on a straight comparison basis. So hopefully by highlighting the differences, that made a bit of sense to everybody.
Kristen, I don't think you answered the question of, in many people's mind, it's like, what can, as you are referring to them, the other company offer recycling of that the Recycle Plus program does not? I think that gets at Councilor Newton's real question there. Like, what is left on the street that can't be recycled in the Recycle Plus program?
To me, that question really comes back to the markets, and is there a strong, stable market for the materials that may still be out there? I mean, in theory, there are probably a lot of things in the garbage that somebody could find a way to recycle if you have enough of the material and if there is a source separated place to drop it off. You know, often we get questions about, well, why aren't you recycling X? And the real answer to that is we're the hauler and the transporter, but we are not the company that actually turns that product into a new product. So we can't create the markets ourselves. We need the markets to emerge and be available to us to send our materials to. And so it's hard for me to answer like what could be recycled, because ultimately it's another player, another company in the process that does that step. So I'm sorry, I'm struggling to answer this a little
Kristen,
bit.
I think maybe I get where you're coming from, and I've been in a lot of conversations where people talk a lot about at conferences and other places where people are talking about all the stuff that they quote can recycle that ends up in landfills anyway. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at is there really a market for what is being promised? And that's not a question you can probably answer, but I think the question being asked is a more fundamental one about what is the competitor saying they will do? You can question whether they actually have a market for the things. I understand that. But what are the things that someone in Tigard wouldn't be able to theoretically recycle at face value? Let's just take what they're saying at face value, that everything the competitor can pick up is recycled properly, which I realize may not be the case. But what is it that is different in the service offering?
The example that I can think of is we are not currently proposing that styrofoam be part of our Recycle Plus program.
Okay,
while the other company does provide collection for that as an additional fee on top of their monthly subscription fee.
Okay, so styrofoam's the big one. I see Mr. Rager, same thing.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm looking at the Ridwell website right now, and the basic categories are the plastic film, clothing, fabric, shoes. I think that our haulers are mentioned textiles, so I don't know if there's a technical difference between
a shoe and a textile.
Right, and maybe they could speak to that. Household batteries is another category, and Ms. Leichner already mentioned that they've been picking those up already. And then light bulbs. And the two haulers mentioned CFLs, and I guess I would just ask for clarification there. Is it all light bulbs, or is it just limited to CFL type of bulbs?
Yeah, right. No, good question. Right now, it is just CFLs, so it's just the compact fluorescent light bulbs with the program.
Okay, and so yes, with Ridwell, the clamshells and styrofoam, those are extra, so that people would pay an extra fee for those. A note on styrofoam, just for what it's worth, there is a company in Tigard that uses styrofoam as part of their manufacturing, and drop off of those materials is free down at the end of Wall Street off of Hunziker. And we can provide that information if you'd like. But that's the differences I see, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so styrofoam, non-CFL bulbs, and a question mark on shoes. Do we have an answer on shoes? Are those textiles?
Our initial offering is not to include items like shoes. It would be the more fabric-based items that are past donation use. So it would be like towels that have holes in them, clothing that, is trashed enough that you would not want to donate it to a nonprofit group.
All right. So I think we can summarize the differences as styrofoam, non-CFL bulbs, and shoes.
And
Councillor
electronics.
Goodhouse.
Electronics would be there one, wouldn't it?
Electronics, yeah, those at the door, I guess, or
Yeah.
at the property, because those are recyclable if brought to a depot. Okay. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you very much. Kristen, you had mentioned the living wage and good job benefits, and somebody had phoned me and asked about that, if that was something that Ridgewell also had, and I couldn't answer that question, but could you just explain a little bit more about the living wage as well as the benefits for your employees?
Yeah, so and I won't speak for Dave, but I know that both he and I and our companies, all of our drivers are union. So they make union scale wages. Those differ slightly between our two contracts. Their benefits are paid almost entirely in full by the company for them and their dependents. And for my company, for the non-union folks, we strive to make sure that all of our folks are making a good and decent wage. We cover the benefits in full for them and their dependents as well. So that is, hopefully that answers your question. I can't speak to what the other company does in terms of pay and benefits, but I know that at least some of the people that collect their materials are gig economy workers and not employees of the organization.
All right.
Great, thank you.
That's a very robust set of questions we've asked. Youth Councillor Nog, you've been awfully quiet. You have any questions before we get into the rest of the hearing?
I can ask one, I guess. As mentioned before, the recycling company collects the materials, and I think they distribute it to a different recycler to actually recycle the physical product. Do you know what percentage of that product actually gets recycled compared to what happens in Ridwell? Because I think in recent years there's been studies shown that a lot of recycled material doesn't actually get recycled, and it gets
just because you
shipped
say it's
overseas.
recycled, or you wish it to be recycled by putting it in the bin, doesn't.
Yeah, I was wondering if there was like a percentage or a number of how much of it's actually being recycled.
I can't speak to specific percentages, but I know I've been hearing this ad on one of my podcasts that talks about how much plastic is made and how much is really recycled, and honestly it grates on my nerves every time I hear it because I think it kind of misrepresents that information. And what I can tell you about Oregon and Tigard and the metro region specifically is that the materials that are truly on the yes list, like these are the things you can recycle at the curb, those all have strong markets and are being recycled. They're not being disposed of. I think where the confusion comes in is that sometimes people put the wrong things in their recycling. Like, for example, there are only certain plastics that are allowed. So if you, for example, put a clamshell plastic in your commingled recycling at the curb, it does not belong there, and it will be disposed of because it is not going through the system to get it to a potential market as we would do in Recycle Plus. So I don't have a percentage on how much recycling people recycle like nationwide that is actually making it to recycling, but I can tell you in Tigard and the metro area, if you're putting the right things in the mix, there's a very small percentage of that might end up at the wrong market or end up as the residual in the landfill. But the right things are being recycled by the right people. So not sure if that answers your question.
I'll just add to that too, that in the work that I've seen presented on this can change dramatically, like month to month, year to year. And so even if there was an answer to that at one point, just know that it's a moving target based on, who or what market is willing to buy it, what they're using it for, whether they need more of it. Are we in a pandemic? There's a lot of variables too, but I think it's a good question. It's just not a static thing. Councillor Goodhouse.
Two things. Just one, just so for clarification, can you just say what clamshells are so people know what that means that they're watching or listening? And I have a question.
Yes. Thank you for asking that, because sometimes I get stuck in industry speak. So a clamshell is like what your berries come in. So it is a plastic container that kind of opens like a clamshell does. That's why we call them that. And it's hinged on one side. So, there are some salad containers like spinach where you kind of pull off that strip and then the whole lid comes off. that would not be considered a clamshell container because the lid does come off without actually having to cut or tear the plastic apart. So berry containers are really the best example. To-go food containers that you might get from a restaurant are also considered clamshells, but we're really talking about number one clamshells that are clear. So berry containers are the best example of what those are.
Okay. That way people just don't think there's actually a bunch of clam eaters out there putting it in. The second, I mean, I guess the kind of follow-up from what Youth Councilor Nog said is this, my kind of just thing that keeps wondering in my mind is then is how does Ridwell pull off on some of those other items that if the haulers have been working on this for years and Washington County has, how can they get away, how can they find a solution for it when it's still being worked on it? But we have no one from Ridwell here to answer that, but that's just my kind of question mark over my head is, you know, how are they able to do that where it's still being in the works with the haulers and everyone working?
Or are they able to?
Are they actually able
that's
to
really
or not?
your,
So
that's really
kind of
your
a question. Is
all right. I assume that was a rhetorical question. Yeah. We're not asking somebody to answer.
Oh, because
that.
there's not someone here that can actually answer it. So.
All right.
Does Councilor Shaw have a question?
Councilor Shaw, go ahead.
I was just going to mention Public Works Director Brian Rager had mentioned that you can recycle styrofoam for free here in Tigard. It is 24/7 and it's Agilix, so it is a very good service for those who are looking to recycle their styrofoam.
Council President Lube, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a question as far as like the on-demand service. Is that going to be like going to a website and putting in your information, or is that like a phone call to a person? I think one of the, the attractiveness is, it's every 2 weeks on Tuesday and those sorts of things. And so what sort of hoops are people going to have to go through in order to get this picked up?
We've set up an online form that people can fill out online. So it does require them to go to our website and request a pickup, but they don't have to call in. It can be done at all hours. And then, of course, people can call or email if that is more convenient for them. So those are kind of the three ways. And then we're also, Washington County has the Garbage and Recycling Day app where people can follow their schedules, get alerts for services reminding them of when things are. And so if a customer utilized that and had signed up for Recycle Plus, that Recycle Plus service would show on their calendar on the weeks that they could have a collection. And so, for example, if they wanted to, they could turn on alerts to remind them 2 days in advance of that service and then go, oh yeah, I need a pickup, I should go in and fill out the form. And I believe they have those alerts set to like send the link to our sign-up forms if we have them, but I would have to double check that that is one of the features that's part of that.
Okay, so for clarification, it's like based on a 2-week cycle, and it's like if you need it this time when people would normally be out in the neighborhood, it's not truly on demand of like, I'm going to make a phone call and 2 days from now someone's going to be here.
Yeah, so we're setting it up, at least for my company, we're setting it up to match the glass collection schedule, the every other week glass. So if it's a glass pickup, it would also be a potential Recycle Plus pickup day, but we would need to receive the request for the service. And that's ultimately just to make sure everybody's on the same page of, yes, I requested a pickup, I acknowledge there's a charge for that. So we're not getting in, well, I got charged, I didn't put my bin out, having those potential concerns of, maybe they didn't intend, maybe they put out their purple bin with glass in it needing an extra pickup and there was a misunderstanding, so.
Yeah, and we're doing the same thing, Counselor, as well. Just exactly like Pride Disposal. You can go to our website and you can sign up for the service, and you can also request an on-call pickup without having to actually call in and request that too. So so really, it's identical, which is some things that we've learned, with the rollout here in Washington County.
All right, thank you. I want to move us on if we can. I'm going to try to provide a summary of the written comments. We received 18 comments from 17 different individuals by the deadline of noon today. Most of those, if not all of them, were advocating for some version of Ridwell being allowed to serve the city of Tigard and indicating that the offerings being provided by or being proposed by our franchise haulers are not adequate. Let's see. We'll move on to in-person testimony. Councilor Goodhouse, I would like you to time people at 3 minutes, please, since Council President Lube is not in the room tonight. I'm going to call people's names. I'd ask that you come up to the front of the room, turn the microphone on. You'll see there's a ring at the bottom that's red right now. It needs to be green before we can hear you. And with that, I will call the first individual, and you'll have 3 minutes. We have 3 people signed up as proponents and 4 people signed up as opponents and nobody neutral. So proponent, first one is Barbara Roth. And please do your best to keep your testimony to 3 minutes. Perfect. And remember to turn the microphone on. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Snyder and council members. I've been a Tigard resident since 2014, but I've been recycling for over 30 years. Oil companies, corporations, and governments have lied to me about how my recycling efforts will help clean up our earth. Instead, we are dumping plastics into the ocean, and until recently, have been shipping them to Asian countries until they refuse to take them anymore. I want to leave this planet better off for my descendants, my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and their progeny. Ridwell has developed plans to collect more recyclables for less money, and they are transparent about where the products will go. A long-standing contract with its haulers has hamstrung the city of Tigard from doing business with Ridwell. I say contracts and amendments can be broken or amended, modified for the good of the citizens and for this planet. I say we better do it now because it's almost too late for me, my family, your families, and the earth. I say get busy and do it. Make it happen. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next proponent is, I think, is it Clark or Claire Schrader? Sorry. Claire. Welcome. Come on up and remember to turn the microphone on. Welcome.
Hi, so my name is Claire Schrader. Like the other lady, I've been recycling most of my adult life. Even before that, my mother was a recycler, reuser. I was impressed by Ridwell and the fact that they not only have transparency with where they recycle their goods, but that they also have promised to work with local sources as much as possible. So we're not talking about collecting something and then shipping it halfway across the world, spending, using a lot of fuel in the process. I also feel like if the current haulers wanted to know whether recycling styrofoam was environmentally responsible or not, there's a company, as several people have mentioned, right here in Tigard called Agilix. You could have gone in there, you could have talked to them, and you could have said, hey, what is your process and how do you keep the environment safe with your process? So I don't feel like there was a really big desire for them to recycle styrofoam. If there was, they would have made more effort to investigate. There are, as previously mentioned, there are more categories being offered by Ridwell, and I do not understand. I mean, I heard the jargon about contracts and so on and so forth. I don't understand why Tigard cannot fix that problem and make it so that both companies can operate if they want to. And that Ridwell can operate with what they pick up, and the other waste companies can operate with what they pick up, and those of us who want to do as much keeping things out of the waste stream as possible have options to put them in different places.
Thank you. All right, Scott, is it Norwood? Welcome.
Thank you. All right, and then just...
It is still on.
All right, it's still on. Well, I'm mostly just adding on to what Claire mostly had mentioned, and as well as herself. I, however, am concerned over mostly the anti-competitive practice aspect in this case. Now, I acknowledge the arguments on the side of the current haulers that there is an environmental reason as to why we should not allow for Ridwell to come in. However, that still doesn't stand in my eye as fair practice, because ultimately speaking, you're still ultimately not allowing for the option for the community to choose whether to choose you guys as the Recycle Plus program or Ridwell's program, regardless. And we as citizens should be allowed choices, and that's what keeps our prices down overall. So that's where I stand personally in the community on this decision personally. But however, I still stand by the environment comes first, regardless. And we have to still get to a net zero carbon by 2050. I personally want to see it way smaller than that. I want to see it in 10 years. And this is going to take the effort of not just us as a community, but the private sector as well. And so I want to see efforts on both parties and both businesses to compete to get to this point personally. But that's all I got personally.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Is it Taylor Lowen? Come on up. Microphone is still on, so go ahead.
Hi, my name's Taylor Lowen, and I'm actually the general manager for Ridwell in the Portland area. So thanks for the opportunity to say a few words. I'm here to say that we should be voting against the authorization of having an exclusive Recycle Plus program in Tigard. You know, Ridwell's prepared to immediately provide a more comprehensive service to all residents of Tigard for a similar or lower price. And there's no reason to add an optional service to the exclusive franchise system and bar innovators like Ridwell. All of your policy goals can be achieved through an alternative licensing approach. And I want to start by making it clear that Ridwell agrees that there are many justifications for having a franchise program for garbage and commingled recycling services provided to everybody. But that's not really the issue that we're talking about here today. The optional supplemental service being proposed is a fundamentally different business than the services currently provided under the franchise contract. And you don't have to take our word for it. That's what the haulers have openly been saying to the media. You know, and Ridwell and franchise haulers peaceably operate side by side in dozens of jurisdictions across the country right now. So what's happening here is that haulers saw Ridwell starting to provide a new kind of service, and now they're trying to leverage their franchise contracts to literally steal our business model and prevent us from helping your residents reduce waste. If the haulers had this intention of providing these services, why didn't they come to you before Ridwell showed up? The fact is, Ridwell's not a waste hauler. We provide a specialized convenience service that helps connect residents with organizations that reuse or recycle items. Just that's things that are excluded from the general curbside programming. We focused first on reuse, connecting households with local nonprofits like Children's Book Bank or Schoolhouse Supplies that can help reuse their stuff found around their house. We also connect with them with specialty recyclers for items that can't go into commingled recycling bins. And over 20,000 households, just in the Portland area, have already embraced this new service as Ridwell members. So the proposal from the haulers is just bad for the environment and bad for the public. First, the hauler service would include fewer opportunities to reduce waste. This includes items like electronics, styrofoam, FLTs, Christmas lights, wine corks, prescription pill bottles that are not included. And the fixed nature of the hauler system really limits expansion to new materials. Second, reusable items appear to be entirely left out of their program for now, and versus every other week with Ridwell, where it's a core part of our service with 22 featured categories annually. Third, you know, there's that question of transparency with no information on the hauler's website about where these items are going versus Ridwell. Fourth, the hauler's program would cost up to $21.45 a month for pickup every other week, more than the $12 to $16 a month for Ridwell's bi-monthly service. And finally, the hauler program will discourage innovation by needlessly preventing residents from taking advantage of new waste reduction opportunities. Now, you may have heard from the haulers that they need everyone to play by the same rules. Ridwell wants the exact same thing. And you can make sure that happens here in Tigard by rejecting a proposal that creates special rules just for companies with existing city rules and look to expanding those policies and forms. Thank you for your time.
I'm going to give you additional time if you want it, just because the haulers were given as much time as they want. So I'm not going to give you 30 minutes, but if you have additional things you want to say, I'm not going to cut you off.
Sure, I really appreciate that. I think there's a couple of things I'd love to clarify. First of which is that when we're talking about price differences and what are we paying Ridwell employees, are we giving them benefits? We're not using any gig economy workers. We only have W-2 full-time or part-time workers that get paid full-time benefits. Our drivers make $20 an hour, and really make sure that we take care of our employees. Also just talking about the difference between the two services, and I think that's come up a lot here today, is what is the difference between what Ridwell offers and what the current haulers offer. Looking at our website, we're talking about those core categories, the difference of having fluorescent light tubes versus just the small light bulbs, of having styrofoam as often as possible, especially around the holidays when it's really prolific, having opportunities for just ongoing featured categories. We'll collect children's books to go to a book bank, we'll collect old eyeglasses frames to get reused by Northwest Lions, then we'll collect prescription pill bottles, then bread tags, we're doing campaign yard signs, wine corks over the holidays. The list goes on, and we're continually innovating and pushing ourselves to really work with local organizations, local nonprofits. Next month, we're picking up bikes, entire bicycles, to go to an incredible local Washington County nonprofit that's going to have bikes for local Afghan refugees who just arrived, Ukrainian refugees, and programming. And I think, there are many places you could go to drop off these items, but that convenience factor for people who don't have vehicles, who don't have access to drive around, to drive one place to Agilix, one place for your plastic film or your clamshells, to try and contact nonprofits to see if they need the materials you have in your home. We're really just looking for a way to help our members responsibly and sustainably reduce their waste that's going to the landfill. Working through DEQ, we're permitted, with Metro, we're permitted. We have transparency where we show every single month the number of residual percentage and what exactly is going to the recycling. So you can see that last month, over 90% of our plastic film went to Trex decking. You can see the percentage of our batteries that go. And I think that we're really just looking to help innovate and I think have options for people who live here in Tigard. I think there's about 2,700 people in Tigard who've said they're interested in Ridwell service already on our website. We haven't done any advertising here. So we would love to be able to provide that service and genuinely work with the city on if it's an additional permit or license or code change. We would love to work forward on a path toward that.
So you made a couple of assertions, or at least one, about our code that, as I understand it, at least in the past, is sort of a top-down entire franchise for solid waste. So can you help me understand the legal framework by which Ridwell is thinking that your service is not regulated by our franchise agreement that already exists, that's exclusive with our haulers?
My understanding is Ridwell's asked if there's a permit process that we could go through that could be established, or a code change. As far as the very specific legal jargon, as a general manager, it's not really my forte, but I know that we would be happy to provide additional information on the specifics of that.
Okay, the other thing I'd like to know is, of all the things, and I'm given what you've stated about transparency, I would think you would have this number off the top of your head. Of all the things that Ridwell collected either in Oregon or nationally or in whatever service area you're in, what percentage of it ended up going to landfills last year anyway?
Of the whole company? I wouldn't be able to
whatever data you have on a percentage basis.
Sure. I mean, I think what's incredible about Ridwell and why it's different than commingled recycling is our members are already pre-sorting the materials. They have canvas bags individually for plastic film, for the feature category, for their batteries, for the light bulbs. And so when you're looking at batteries or light bulbs, it's 100% going to the recycler. Looking at plastic film, it's usually over 90%. Our clamshells over 90%. Varies a little bit month to month, and so that's going to recyclers who are Trex decking is able to take all of that material, grind it up with wood chips, and use it. The clamshell, as long as we're giving them 100% number one clear plastic, that's all being used into new materials. So, and those are numbers that we're just posting on our website every single month about what those numbers look like and fluctuate as we work with our partners and members around education.
So they're not 100%. I mean, they're not 100%.
No,
okay.
It's not 100%. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Does any other member of the council have any questions for the representative from Ridwell? Youth Councilor Nog.
Sorry, the microphone. In what aspects, like environmentally speaking, do you think Ridwell kind of falls short on, and are there any plans on making it better? Like, do you have an example?
As far as environmental aspects go, I think, you know, it would be a dream for every single vehicle we use to be an electric vehicle, if it was more affordable for us to do that. So I think that's one goal or aspiration that we have. And I think just the continual expansion of service. You know, our members write in and ask for everything from toothbrushes to contact lens cases. So our partnerships team is constantly in the case of trying to figure out what kind of domestic recycler or partner or reuse can we use for those. So I think it's kind of a constant push for innovation. We're a new company, and so we're looking to just continually expand.
Councillor Shaw.
Thank you very much. Do you have a number of those partners that you utilize in the Washington County area for the reuse of clothing?
Do we have a number of partners in the Washington County
Yeah,
area
just,
for reuse?
mhm.
Yeah, so for reuse of clothing, one of our biggest categories we do is winter warmth every single fall, and we worked with, I think, maybe 10 different nonprofits last year. And you're talking about a lot of mostly homeless shelters or places like Rose Haven, which is a place that works with women and children who are coming out of domestic violence situations. We're this year, I think, even working with the Bernie's Mittens group that makes the mittens out of clothing for wool sweaters. Most of our clothing goes to Pioneer Wiping Cloth, where they turn into cleaning rags or resell. But yeah, our reuse is a lot of the winter warmth clothing. And also kids' clothing. We work with a nonprofit in St. John's around kids' clothing specifically.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Next person to testify, Margot Monty. Did I get that right? Hopefully. Come on up, and microphone is still on.
As we emerge from this pandemic and take stock of the stark realities of the world's social, economic, and environmental challenges, our best strategy is to find ways to create more cohesive communities and raise public awareness about resource conservation. We must all be conscious of the impact of our every action has on this planet and all of its species, and which will sustain us if we treat it with respect. We must be innovative in finding new ways to conserve usable resources, and we've made big strides in recycling and repurposing materials over the last 30, even the last 10 years, but the time is right now, yesterday even, to find new ways to turn waste into usable resources. I find that the Recycle Plus program at Washington County proposes is a tenuous step forward at best. It has been extremely disappointing to watch it devolve into a legal strong-arm battle with Ridwell when it could have been met with gratitude and collaboration. To address the issue of transparency, I called Waste Management today just to get some information about the Recycle Plus program, and I said, well, all these items that you pick up, where will they go? And the customer service rep told me, well, I don't have the breakdown on that yet, but I'm hoping to get some training soon. So I'd take that in mind. And in the time that it has taken for all this to happen, how many tons of waste from Tigard residents could have been kept out of the landfills? In spending money on litigation rather than innovation, how much longer will it take to develop new ways to reuse post-consumer resources and potentially create well-paying jobs for the diverse citizens of our region, while hopefully starting to reduce the negative impacts on our failing climate? Ridwell has developed partnerships to collect, recycle, and reuse many more items than what the Recycle Plus program is proposing, all at a lower cost. As a consumer, I find that very appealing and resent that the City of Tigard is not allowing me the option to choose how best to manage my household waste. And if I am allowed to work with Ridwell, I have this ability to help effect positive change for a number of organizations in the community and a lot of people that really need it. So I urge you to vote no on tonight's resolution. Maybe as a stopgap, extend Ridwell's franchise exemption to do its business in the City of Tigard effective immediately would be great, until you can all find a way to come together and work together on this. Instead of fighting, get together, put your heads together. I think Ridwell would be very receptive to innovating and pooling resources, and I urge you to do that post-haste. Thank you. Perfect timing.
Thank you. Yeah, very impressive on that. Next person is Lisa Phillips. Welcome. Come on up. Microphone is still on.
Thank you. I have heard a lot of really great speakers tonight, and I appreciate that. I've been in Tigard and working hard at recycling as much as I could for the past 20 years, and have been consistently frustrated by, I drive into a variety of places to get rid of stuff, and have been frustrated with the amount of recycling that's available through our current franchise. And until Ridwell came on the scene, and I've been watching them closely for several years, I don't feel like Pride really changed much in what we could recycle there in the past few years. You know, paper, glass, metal was available, but all these other things that Ridwell is now making possible for reusing and repurposing, we just don't have that option. And it frustrates me that, like other people have said, that we're limited in our choices in Tigard. It seems like the time is now that we really do need to make a lot of changes as a community. And I would love for Tigard to be a progressive, environmental leading community instead of trailing all the other communities in this area. I feel like if that is our only option, is the Recycle Plus, we are going to be way behind in our opportunities here. So I encourage you also to vote no for this and to find a way for Ridwell to be able to work here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person up and last speaker in the room that is signed up is it Corey Bartnick? Did I get that right?
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. So really what it comes down to for me is what's going to work best. And Ridwell is a company that has, by all accounts, in many different areas, been extremely successful at what they do. And so for the Tigard government to do what seems to me to be stand behind something that could be fairly easily remedied by changing an amendment and say we can't do anything seems really to me an inadequate response from government. So I would just urge you to, as many other people have said here tonight, expand your perspective and look at what else you could do to make something happen that would work best for all of the constituents in the community, as well as ultimately the environment and the planet.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to testimony via phone and video. Mr. Nolup, can you, so I can manage the meeting here, can you tell me how many people are waiting on the phone queue and how many are waiting in the video queue?
Sure can, Mr. Mayor. No callers and no video testimony.
0 and 0?
0 and 0.
Okay. It's easy to manage. All right. Staff, Mr. Rager, do you want to come back up? Response to testimony by staff?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. You've heard a lot of information tonight and a lot of testimony, and you know, I think this comes down to a policy decision by the council, and you know, unless the haulers have other things to add, you know, we can just answer any further questions you have after hearing the testimony.
Okay. Further questions? Councillor Goodhouse.
A question for clarification. So if the council moves forward and approves this agenda item, that doesn't preclude in the future any kind of discussion or changes for code for Redwall, does it? Is this just more us approving the haulers to do this extra option, but it still doesn't take off the table and say no to Redwall if we ever down the road decide to look at changing our code and so forth, or does it restrict that in the future? Because I more of a response to saying one of the people testified saying this would be a no vote on almost Redwall, but if this is, I just want a clarification on that.
I'm going to ask our city attorney to speak to that if she would.
So if council approves the item tonight, that authorizes the franchised haulers to move forward with this collection service. So Ridwell could still operate to the extent it doesn't conflict with the franchised haulers. If council approves the action tonight to go back and take away services from our franchised haulers would be much more difficult, and it would require a code amendment.
I think Councillor Goodhouse's question, though, is about a coexisting system.
So the only coexisting system would be for services not provided by the franchised haulers.
Okay. So you're suggesting that would make something, if this were approved tonight, that would make that more difficult?
Correct. Most likely it would.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Newton, did you have more to? You're confused. Okay. Let's get that clarified.
So if council were to approve the action tonight, allowing the franchised haulers this collection service, Ridwell could operate so long as it was not in conflict with what was granted. So Ridwell could not collect anything that the franchise haulers currently are recycling. So if there were additional items that Ridwell wanted to provide services for, so long as that didn't conflict, that would be okay. If the items such as film CFLs and the other items that the franchise haulers collect, Ridwell would be unable to collect those because doing so would be a violation of the franchise.
And a duplicative service, basically.
Exactly, right.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Unless we made a code change that we would allow duplicate services in those areas, but that would be a lot more lengthy.
Well, her suggestion earlier is that we don't do it in that order if that's an intent, if that's our intent, right?
Right.
Councillor Newton.
Yeah, I had a question about the exemption. I remember hearing something about that earlier, and then I forgot about it till somebody mentioned it. Is there an ability for, I think it was the Ridwell rep, is there an ability to issue an exemption, and what does that look like?
So what the City of Portland did is grant an exemption to a specific carve out for companies like Ridwell that provided hard to recycle items. Portland has a significantly different franchise system than we do. They have individually negotiated agreements, whereas we have one code that applies to everything. So it could be done. It would be a much more complicated process than what Portland went through.
Councillor Goodhouse.
And to get into legalese, are we, what would
just
be?
Just a reminder, we're in questions right now. I think that's where you're going, but I just want to keep that on.
What's the legal ramifications if we were to, since we have a agreement with the haulers, a franchise agreement, if we were to vote no, but there's that option that states in our code, would that create a legal problem for the city if we voted no, restricting the haulers from doing a service that they want to provide since we have that agreement with them?
So to vote no, the haulers could still provide the service. They just wouldn't be able to collect rates for it. And if the haulers were providing it, that would still be a conflict with Ridwell. So the haulers could still go ahead, and then we would be in violation of our franchise with the haulers.
Why couldn't they offer it as a competing service that's not being offered under the franchise agreement? I mean, they could go create their own company called, Bridwell and collect them. I mean, couldn't they just do that? Like, I don't understand what would be, like, they could do that completely outside of the franchise agreement, right?
Well, they still couldn't operate, they still couldn't collect something that the franchise haulers were collecting, though.
I'm tracking that. This is sort of like take a leap forward and say, let's say the council, for the sake of discussion, the council's going to decide that we want to allow something more expanded for hard to recycle items. Then that would mean more, I mean, you wouldn't just exclusively allow Ridwell to do that, right? If we were to make that decision, anybody could potentially be in that game, right?
Right.
Including the existing franchise haulers, right?
Right, so unless the franchise haulers did it for no fee, because then it would be included theoretically in their existing services, and then collection.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're not in the business of offering things for free. Okay. Youth Councilor Nog.
I have a quick question. So if there, like, if this is hypothetical, what would happen if there was kind of a program that we worked with a different, or like it could be anybody, but I'll just say Ridwell for now for the sake of contingency. We worked with Ridwell to set up like a program once or twice a year to pick up items that our current waste management program did not take. And then we worked with places here to kind of pick up the material and then distribute it. Like for styrofoam, if we have something that every 4 months we pick up styrofoam from every house and then drop it off at Agilix. Would that be a possibility?
So the question is, could we create a completely different system for, I don't know that the staff will be able to answer that tonight, but maybe.
I'll take a shot, and others can help me out there. I think, as I'll just repeat what City Attorney Rahala mentioned, I think as long as there was not a conflict with our existing solid waste ordinance, possible, we'd have to really work on that and do some work to figure out the details. But I think concept-wise, as long as there isn't a conflict with the ordinance, we could look at that.
Operationally, it'd be I mean, there'd be a lot going on there.
Right.
Councilor Shaw.
Great. So a question, bicycle was raised as being one of the bulkier items that could be picked up. And according to the website, it says for a fee to cover both the pickup and disposal costs. So I assume that would be the case. Can a bike then also be dropped off at the depot, and would then that be considered competing?
I like that question, and I'm going to ask Ms. Leichner in particular to respond, because I think you mentioned, Kristen, there's bulky waste events that Pride in particular, I don't know about waste management, but will you talk a little about the bulky waste options that are there now?
Sure. So anytime somebody has an item that is too large to go in their garbage cart at the curb, we provide bulky waste collection, and a lot of those materials can be recycled. Some of them are garbage, like a couch, for example. That would be something we would collect that would be disposed of as garbage. But we pick up small appliances, washers, dryers, refrigerators, things like that we do recycle because there is a way to recycle them. And a bicycle would be similar, where if we were to pick up a bicycle currently under our bulky waste program, we would recycle the metal. The tires would be removed of and disposed of as trash. So that's, we have that currently in our system on how to handle those larger, bulky items.
Thank you.
Councilor Goodhouse, then I want to try to wrap this up if we can.
I wanted to just rephrase my question legally. Do we have a legal obligation to approve with our franchise agreement with the haulers, their request?
No, it's a policy choice of council.
Okay.
Okay, so no further questions, no more response to testimony by staff. I'm going to close the public hearing. And council consideration of resolution number 22-26. Who would like to speak first? Councilor Newton.
I have a couple of comments. First of all, I'm sitting here thinking about our community resiliency commitment to be carbon neutral by 2035. And it feels to me like we need to really be broad in thinking about our commitment to recycling. I think what people need to realize is that our current code has a provision in it that doesn't allow us to violate. We have to stick with that. So we could change that code section, which I'm going to suggest we consider doing. And that way we could open up, the options for everybody, which I think would be good to do. I also think with regard to this program, if we approve it, I would like to see something in the resolution that requires a review in a year, because I would like to see some of the things like the quarterly reuse option. I think we need to light a fire under recycling in this community if we're really going to have a commitment to it. So I would like to see that commitment in a year. So my concern, folks, is if we don't approve this, we're not in the ability to do anything right now, and that concerns me. I would like to see us make a commitment to reviewing that 11, whatever, of our code to remove that barrier and do something now. I realize it's not ideal for everybody, but I think if we make a commitment to trying to open up our ability to have more options and try this and see if it can be expanded. I'm hearing everybody wanting choices, and I think that's a good thing. But right now, we're somewhat limited by what we can do today because of that provision in our code. So I'd like to see that addressed and have the community have an option to weigh in on that and have that reviewed quickly, because I'm concerned about carbon neutrality in 2035 if we don't make a serious commitment to recycling.
All right, Council President Lube, you want to go?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like for us to find a way for Ridwell and Recycle Plus to exist. And if I'm hearing correctly, City Attorney Rahala stated that it would be much more difficult to do that if we approve, what's in front of us tonight. And I just, we received more emails on this topic than I think we've received on anything else. Our community is asking for us to do this. And I think it's a good choice. I think it's good for people to have options as far as which way they would like to go. So I would like to see us find a way for both of the programs to exist.
Well, I'm going to just tag on to that. I mean, I think if we're headed in that direction, I don't know that we want to assume that the franchise haulers want to be in this business. They need to make their own decisions if we're headed in that direction, and they may not want to be competing or duplicating and or offering what some would say, or many members of our community have said, is less service and more expensive. The haulers think of it a little differently, but that's how it's playing, at least to many community members. But we shouldn't make the assumption, I guess, that for sure is going to happen, depending on how we go. Okay. Councillor Shaw, anything?
Yes, thank you. I am ready to approve the resolution tonight. We do have a franchise agreement. If there's a discussion moving forward to reconsider the statute, I certainly think that's something we can do. I am concerned that there is additional cost on the bulky items, on the bigger items, whether it's via our franchise haulers or Ridwell. You are going to pay either way. I do think there's many alternatives and many nonprofits that are benefiting currently from donations, whether it's the Clothes Closet at Tigard High or several other places. So I'd hate to see what that potentially could do to those nonprofits, but I would be willing, if there's a future down the road, to reconsider amending that statute.
So Councillor Shaw, did I hear you say that you are okay with moving forward tonight, or did you say you're not?
I am okay moving forward.
You are okay. You don't have concern. I mean, the city attorney was indicating concerns if we wanted to, try to move forward with something that allowed Ridwell to operate, that would be more difficult. Is that
right? What I'm proposing is that we stick with the agreement we have with the franchise, and the haulers would be able to provide this service.
Okay.
as is with the 245, and then the additional 945, I think it was, for the pickup. So.
City
Does that
Attorney
not make
Rahala,
sense?
are you tracking what Councilor Shaw's legally suggesting? Because I'm hearing two different things, and I want to make, if
Well, I'm happy to clarify it too.
Well, I think you made.
Or City
you
Attorney
did
Rahala, if
twice.
you'd
I
like
was
to
gonna
try
see-
to
I was gonna
reiterate
see
what
if
I
City
might have
Attorney
said.
Rahala understood it, because then.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you understand what is being proposed?
Well, it sounds like, and I'll defer to the speaker, it sounds like the proposal is to continue with the existing franchise proposal by our haulers, and if there is a way to work to allow Ridwell in the future, that we can work towards that, but for the time being, the policy decision would be to stick with the haulers. That was how I understood it.
Okay, but
Correct.
that also makes the Ridwell thing more difficult in the future.
So it exempts Ridwell from operating immediately, or prohibits Ridwell from operating immediately, and would provide, yeah, it would be whatever the future has. And like I said before, taking away an ability to operate is, if we were going to try to limit the hauler's ability, I think is harder to do once they've been providing the service. Maybe not necessarily, but in my opinion, it would be. Again, it's a policy decision of council as to which direction.
So I'm
to go.
confident in Ridwell too, to come up with, as our speaker mentioned, all the new recycling opportunities that the haulers may not have. And so I think that those opportunities, and there are going to be more and more. So that's why I would be suggesting the approach I have.
Youth Councilor Nog.
Okay, so one of the things that I would like to see emphasized on, like, either trash collection services is the idea of reducing and reusing over recycling. And I know that the main platform is recycling, but since there are so many people that rightfully so should be concerned about the environmental factors, I think if people had ways of pushing for reusing and reducing over recycling, I think that's a really important priority. But if we were to continue with this plan, would there be a way to have kind of a joint plan in the future where you could kind of stop duplication of services and carbon from vehicles if we continue for this for the time being? And is there a way to make it easier for future collaboration?
Is there a staff response to that, or?
So for clarity into the future, looking at collaboration, if I'm understanding it, how does the community, the haulers, a Ridwell type organization work closer together? And are we able to put in what we can do as a local government to facilitate that?
Yes, I guess my thinking was if we do continue on with the resolution for the time being to kind of stay on track with our climate resiliency plan, is there a way in the future to make it easier? Because as we kind of talked about, if we move on with the plan, it'll be harder for that collaboration in the future, but is there a way we can do something to make it easier to have more recycling options if people wanted to? And if there are those recycling options, is there a way to have both businesses kind of work together to have a plan so that there's not a duplication of services and there's not that repetition of the carbon output from the vehicles that are used?
Well, I guess a couple things come to mind. One is, from a council standpoint, the expectation for us as the team working on this to continue to try to facilitate the conversations that you're talking about tonight, right, with the haulers, with the Ridwell and others that may want to be in this space as well. I think a second thing, it's been brought up today already, the haulers through the franchise that's been proposed would provide certain services. Obviously, we can continue to talk to Ridwell in this case, because those areas that are not competing, they may find business opportunities there to achieve some of the things that you're talking about, what they're trying to accomplish as well. So there's probably a few different conversations that have to occur. And really, I think that's where it goes is we need to talk, right? We have to have the conversations, what I think I'm hearing from you, that are in, that really advance the community resiliency plan that has come up a few times. If I may, Mayor, just if for the community members here. First, thank you for being here and sharing your thoughts. If you're not aware, we have been going through a community resiliency plan effort, and on October 25th, right here in the council chamber, we will be talking about 17 low carbon actions in the plan in general. So I would just encourage you to all be aware of that. One of our assistant city managers may reach out, and so you're aware of that effort as well. Those are the things I think you're getting at, is how we continue to, as a community, work together in this area and in other areas. So.
All right, Councilor Goodhouse.
A few things. I guess so. Basically, what I'm hearing is nothing could. I guess this whole time Ridwell could have been operating. They couldn't have been operating because we had to make the decision.
Well, they could have been. They could have been in violation potentially, and they did that in some other communities.
But with us passing this, is there anything stopping Ridwell from providing the other services, or would they have to get approval for the other services?
So it depends on what the other services were and what the use of them is. So if it's provided to a purely charitable organization, that's treated differently than if it's recycled, in terms of, is it solid waste, is it a charitable donation? So it would depend on the specific item.
Okay. And I agree with Councilor Shaw. I mean, this is something right now that we can start at least moving forward. I know when we go through code amendments and changing, that there's not a simple, quick process to go through that, and you want to make sure that you thoroughly look through it. So I think the time it's going to take to go through the code amendments, unless it's quick, I mean, it's going to take a long time. And when you do that, you want to make sure that you're just not what else it could affect. So I don't see that being done in a timely manner. It could be a long period. So I agree with passing this now, and we take a look at everything else to see what we do for changing, because otherwise we're looking at code amendment. We could look at a year or two for a code amendment. I don't know what we're looking time frame, but 6 months to a year, or, yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna ask some questions that are sort of down that same direction. I want to sort of think bigger here for a moment, if everybody will indulge in that. What if we were to say that hard to recycle stuff is just like we amend our municipal code to say that's not part of the franchise and anyone can compete on that, and there's not going to be an exclusive franchise, but people can come to the city and request basically a license or an exemption to do that? How difficult would that be?
So that is similar to the way Portland treated it, and we could do that. You know, the other part in this is our partners are the haulers, the franchised haulers, and so the city can propose the code. Quite frankly, it depends on what actions the haulers want to take in response to that. The process for amending the code gives them a say. It's a contractual agreement between two parties, and so they do have the ability to weigh in. So if it turns out to be a collaborative process where we can agree, that's going to be a much quicker result for everyone than if we get into protracted negotiations with the haulers.
From a public policy perspective, though, we're talking about a lot of services they're now not offering and don't plan to. I mean, that's been clearly stated tonight. I don't think we need to debate that. That was pretty clearly demonstrated by all the discussion. So in that environment, I mean, I guess I'm having a little trouble understanding how that's the environment when they're not even proposing they provide the same services that are being described.
Right, and so if it's just for non-overlapping services, that is a different conversation. I had heard early on from Ridwell that they were not interested in providing just those services, that essentially the money was in the items that the haulers were going to take, and so they were not interested in providing the non-overlapping services. I don't know if that's still the case, but if we're just talking about the non-overlapping services, then that's going to be a quicker resolution.
But the haulers aren't providing these services now.
Correct. So right, assuming that council approved this tonight, then that was what I was referring to. Yes, you're right. If it's not, if council doesn't approve this action, then we are still.
I mean, I'm just trying, this seems, again, taking a step back, this seems like a situation where most of the rationale for having a single franchise operator in the space doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I haven't heard really a lot of arguments or description of why that would be the case. And if that's true, which there's lots of reasons, and even I think other public testimony supporting Ridwell stated that for solid waste garbage, that everybody agrees that should be done the way that we have it being done now. I haven't heard really any demonstration of why. So I don't think that we as a city and a city council need to be in the business of regulating things that don't need to be regulated. I mean, that's one of the that's one of the next items on the agenda is a good example of that with the parking restrictions that all communities have had in Oregon for decades that we've now concluded were probably not necessary and overly burdensome and created unintended consequences. I'm having a little bit of trouble seeing what the rationale is to even be regulating in this space.
Absolutely, and I don't disagree. And I think one of the issues is that we have an old code section related to solid waste franchising, and it has not been negotiated or updated recently, and it never contemplated a situation like this.
Define recently. 30 years, 40 years, 20 years?
We have nitpicked along the way.
But it's been a while.
We added some things, but yeah, no, it's been quite a long time since it was updated.
Okay.
So we added business recycling and stuff, but yeah, I mean, 78 was one of the last. It looks like it was probably adopted in 1970.
So when I was 3 years old, that's awesome.
So
okay.
So yes, it is an old code section. The issue, though, also is that it is our franchise agreement is this code. So like I said, the code is a contractual agreement between two parties. And so it is not like the same section of Tigard Municipal Code that the council can unilaterally amend. It does require a process with the haulers. And so it is going to be a different animal than what council is used to.
Yeah, again, that's in the environment of the space that they're working in now. And we're really talking about a different space, right? Okay. Does that open anyone else's brains to other thoughts or suggestions? Councillor Shaw.
So City Attorney Wahala, you'd mentioned it could be, if I saw the nodding correctly, 6 months to a year to go through a change in that code. Is that accurate?
Again, I think a lot of it is going to depend on the response from the haulers. The process as spelled out in our code to amend the franchise requires council form a solid waste advisory committee, which is obviously a committee that Tigard doesn't have right now. So it is a process that I don't know that we've ever gone through in Tigard, quite
But
honestly.
we would need to do that to move forward if we're saying this isn't in the franchise now?
So if we were to carve out an exemption, that would be a code amendment that would essentially be an amendment to the existing franchise. And
Okay.
so it would require a negotiation. So again, it's a much more complicated, different process than a regular code amendment.
Councillor Newton?
Along that line, so we're carving out an exemption? Is it the code section or the actual contractual agreement?
So they are one and the same.
Okay, so which section is it? Which code section?
So it would be, it would be adding to the exemptions listed in it would be 1104.040.
Just to follow up on what you were saying, Mr. Mayor, it feels like we're now entering a sort of a different era. Yeah. And, recycling of sort of those basic recycling items, as you commented, all the 100 emails I read, nobody argued with that. But I just feel like we need to treat this differently. I'm a little concerned about, I'm agreeing with some of the points you made about how this should be handled.
Okay. Other thoughts? Councillor Shaw?
So I agree it's definitely a new error, but if we treat it differently and we don't move this forward, then we're not recycling those materials. And so we would have to go through a process that could take 6 months to a year, and we still wouldn't be recycling those materials. So it seems to me we'd want to recycle them now and then have that discussion, because it is a new era, about changing the code, putting the advisory committee together, and so forth.
On that point, City Attorney Rahala, is there a way to change the code and what we vote on tonight such that we could make it easier to sort of move forward? And so we're kind of doing both and instead of either or? Or because it wasn't posted tonight, does that pose a problem because it wasn't, the community wasn't given that language?
No, that's not the issue. Trying to think how it would look. I suppose we could adopt the rates effective for a period of 6 months, and then at which time there would be no rates, and so the haulers would have the ability to decide whether they wanted to continue operating after that. I think operationally, I won't speak for the haulers, but that seems, I don't know that that makes business sense for them to do that.
Could we adopt the rates and allow Ridwell to operate using the same rates at the same time for the same services?
No, because they don't have a franchise from the city. So we would have to.
And it's not exempted right now.
Exemption, correct.
Just trying to brainstorm here. Councilor Goodhouse or Council President Lube, you guys have been quiet for a while. Anything? Otherwise,
I just think it's because it's so important and it is a new era, and I hear you that we want to be recycling these things now, but you know, just how much more difficult it could be to give something away and then take it back in the franchise agreement. I think we need to do it the right way the first time because it is uncharted territory. So I'm not in favor of moving forward tonight with what we have proposed.
Does someone want to make a motion? Because we're kind of at, I think, a bit of a potential impasse here. Councilor Shaw?
I have a question. And Council President Lube, you mentioned not doing it in the right way, but what I think I heard was there isn't a right way or wrong way. If we approve this tonight, there's still the option of going back and having that discussion and putting the mechanism in place so a Ridwell could operate, but in the meantime, we'd be collecting those materials.
But in the current franchise agreement, it's probably going to be extremely difficult to take something away, and I assume that there would be a significantly higher chance of litigation of, you know, the hauler saying, you agreed to this franchise and now you're taking it away to give it to somebody else and do something different. I'm thinking of the risk level also that we're putting in front of the city by potentially doing it that way.
Yeah, I thought I heard the mayor say if we had like a 6 months agreement.
City Attorney Rahala proposed that as a way to potentially get around that. Councilor Newton?
Well, I'm concerned too about approving this with as part of our franchise, you know. I'm just a little bit concerned. Yeah, it just kind of sets a precedent. So, so I struggle a little because that's going to be hard to undo.
Are you ready to make a motion?
No.
Okay. Councilor Goodhouse.
But I mean, if we're looking at protocol, I guess we're also looking at that this is an option that we have in our franchise agreement that other services can be added and so forth. That's why I kind of asked like legalities, where if we say no, but it's part of the franchise agreement, saying that they have the option to add on these additional services, and they're saying they want to, where does that put us with the current agreements? Is just my question. And kind of like what Councilor Shaw was saying is if we at least get this going and have the recycling, then we can look at later of offering, you know, going through the whole process and the committees, then to determine we can offer both of them at the same time.
Did you want to make a motion?
I mean, if we can do a motion in that manner, I mean, the motion would be something along the lines of approving this now to get it going and then looking at a model in the future for these to coexist.
So something like what the city attorney proposed to meet that need, have the rates expire in 6 months?
I don't, the rates expire in 6 months, no, because then it doesn't, I don't think it makes business sense for a company to start with saying, hey, we have an option of putting in this new investment in for 6 months.
Yeah, they may not. All right, staff, you've got something?
Yeah, due to the discussion you're having, the decision in front of you, at this point, we'd recommend that we continue this to the next meeting, which would be on the 11th of October. Give us a chance, step back, think through some of the things you're talking about, talk with the haulers, make sure we have some of the conversations before you make this important decision tonight. So it may give us the ability to bring you some additional information in a couple weeks.
Councillor Goodhouse?
Since the discussions continue, what also has been in the back of my head is and it may not even fall into this, but there's already other services, I think, that do provide services for residents. I mean, I think it's on a different scale of like the junk now, where people come and take things and they do recycle, or they take items from people's homes. Do those play into this at all, or is that a totally different service that, I mean, are we gonna be?
Those are also franchise violations right now as well.
Okay, because I know there's all kinds of, just going on and looking at businesses, there's all kinds of services that come and do this already. So, you see the big junk now containers, or so if that's where I think City Manager Reimer said, we have a big can of worms we just opened, and if we're looking at that, are we also taking into play what all those other companies are out there and what's going on?
Well, they're already conspicuously violating it, just like every private drop box you get too. Those are all just conspicuous violations of the current code that was apparently written in 1978.
Well, that's updated.
Okay, so is everybody okay with the city manager's proposal to let the staff work on this further and bring something back after? I would actually suggest, in the spirit of kind of trying to move things forward as well, yes, work with the haulers as you proposed. I would suggest there be some discussion with Ridwell as well. Try to work to something that may work for the benefit of our community, which is really what you heard this whole council asking for.
Do we need a motion to continue since it's a public hearing?
Yeah, it's just a good question. Okay. Do we need to continue it to date certain or something?
No, that's just for land use. We have direction. We're comfortable.
Okay, so nothing further needed? Okay, and then agenda management wise, we are over an hour behind. City Manager Reimer, you had suggested that we move at least one item off the agenda. Was that the community development projects update, item 10?
Yep, I'd recommend item 10 move to the 11th as well.
Okay.
We would like to have the parking discussion if it's at all possible.
Okay, so anybody that was going to be presenting on that tonight can be dismissed?
Yep.
All right. Well, let's move forward then with item number 6 on the agenda, public hearing, City of Tigard first quarter budget supplemental. I will open the public hearing. Anyone that wants to testify may do so by phoning and calling in. Call in to get in the queue, 503-966-4101. Again, 503-966-4101. Finance Director Trimp, staff report, please.
Excuse me, if Cindy's talking, I can't hear. I don't think the microphone's turned on.
It's not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Mayor Snyder, members of the council. Cindy Trimp, we have before you the first quarter supplemental budget requests for fiscal year 2023. The majority of these requests have already been approved in prior years. However, we were not able to complete all of them due to supply issues, contractor availability and project delays. This supplemental request is the formal budget authority so that we can continue these projects this fiscal year. The only new item budget requests that we have are due to grant funds the city is receiving, and we will need the formal budget authority to use these funds. And they are a security firewall replacement and some ARPA funding requests to help supplement the library's lunch program. The total budget request is $11,123,689 across 19 various funds. They are largely supported by unanticipated beginning fund balance, federal and state grants, and contingency. The list you have has the details of each of the supplemental requests. We also have staff available online if you should have any questions related to any of these requests. And I'm available if you have any questions also. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I don't believe we had any written public comment. City Recorder Krager, is that correct? That's correct. All right. Mr. Nolep, is there anyone in the queue to testify either by phone or video?
No callers or participants virtually.
All right, I'll close the public hearing. Council consideration of resolution 22-27.
I move to approve resolution number 22-27.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All right, City Recorder, please read the number and title of the resolution.
Resolution number 22-26, a resolution to adopt the 2023 first quarter budget supplemental, including budget adjustments to the capital improvement plan, community development, public works, policy and administration, and community services.
All right, and Council President Lube, you want to vote first?
Sure. Yes.
All right, members of the council present in person in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? All right, resolution 22-27 is adopted unanimously. We're now going to convene as the Town Center Development Agency for the next item. I don't see our name tags. Do we need to flip? No? Okay.
No, we decided not to. Mayor, could I make one correction?
Sure.
Because we didn't adopt a resolution in the earlier item, the number is 22-26.
I see.
So you just announced 27. We're not there yet.
All right. Well, I'm not, did we move the correct resolution then to be approved?
Yes.
She's saying since we didn't do the,
It's just a
since we didn't do
number.
the one before, there's no.
Oh, I'm following her, but I thought the motion was to approve resolution 22-27. So I'm just clarifying whether we've got more.
But you read the title. So.
She read the title
Yeah, so
correctly,
we're
it sounds
good,
like.
yeah.
Does this matter? That the motion and the second were from something different? City
No.
Attorney Rahala, or?
It's clear from the record what was
Okay, what the intent was. All right. So we approved resolution number 22-26. Okay. Is that going to become an issue later too, potentially? Yes. All right. We'll try to learn. All right, we are convening as the Town Center Development Agency. I'm going to open the public hearing. Anyone that wishes to testify may do so by calling in to 503-966-4101. And with that, Finance Director Trimp, staff report, please.
Good evening again, Cindy Trimp. The Town Center Development first quarter budget supplemental request is for one item. It is for the Public Works Capital Improvement Plan for the Main Street, Green Street retrofit Phase 2. Say that 3 times, it's really hard. And that is for $1,108,000. And again, we have staff here available if you have any questions.
All right, thank you. City Recorder Krager, any written testimony for this item? I don't believe so. All right, and nobody signed up in the back of the room? So in the same? No, I have that here. No one signed up. Okay. Mr. Nolep, are there any callers in the queue or video testimony?
No callers, Mr. Mayor.
All right, I'll close the public hearing. Let's see, this is a TCDA resolution, so it will stay in order, correct?
That's correct.
All right, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to move to approve TCDA resolution number 22-04.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? City Recorder, please read the number and title of the resolution.
Resolution number 22-04, a resolution to adopt the fiscal year 2023 first quarter budget supplemental, including budget adjustments to Town Center Development Agency, Urban Development.
All right. Let's see. Director Lube, your vote?
Aye.
And all members of the council present in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, TCDA Resolution 22-04 is adopted unanimously. We'll reconvene as the Tigard City Council for the remaining of the meeting. Next item up on the agenda is item number 8, a public hearing update to court fees. I will open the public hearing. Anyone that wishes to testify may do so by calling in on the phone to 503-966-4101. And with that, we have Judge Oberdorfer. Staff report, please. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Mayor, Council, community members, and colleagues. I am asking you to approve a resolution codifying the fee for collections, cases sent to collections at 25%, as well as the fees before you in Exhibit A. The fees in Exhibit A, I would ask for judicial discretion to amend those fees with regard to, on a case-by-case basis, but not the collection fee.
So collection fee is going to be fixed.
Collection fee is going to be fixed.
Okay. Let's see. That's the staff report. Any questions of the judge? All right.
I believe Youth Councilor Nog.
Oh, sorry, Youth Councilor Nog. Go ahead.
Oh, I perform weddings here. Here in
Yeah.
City Hall. Sometimes I do it outside. You can get married here. Yes. It's the best part of the job.
It's literally a wedding fee. Okay, City Councilor Shaw.
Can you get that on social media?
To amend that fee if folks need it.
Councilor Shaw.
Great, thank you. And so these fees are the current fees now, and the request is just to have you have the ability to amend it on a case-by-case basis.
I can amend it on a case-by-case basis now. I am asking that it be made part of the fee schedule as opposed to court rule.
Thank you.
Yes. Or is it the fee table, the fee schedule table?
And that is what's proposed, correct?
That is what's
If we just
proposed.
act on what was proposed, we're doing what you're requesting.
Yes.
Okay. All right. City Recorder Krager, we didn't have any written comments, did we, today? All right. Mr. Nolip, are there any callers in the queue or video testimony?
No callers, Mr. Mayor.
Anyone wanting to get married?
I'm ready.
Nope.
Okay. All right. I will close the public hearing. Council consideration resolution 22-28.
27.
It's late.
And I'm moving fast. I thought I would learn. I didn't. Thank you, Councilor Newton. Would you like to make a motion?
I will move to approve resolution number 22-27.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? City Recorder, please read the number and title of the resolution.
Resolution number 22-27, a resolution to amend the city fee schedule and adopt fees for municipal court.
All right. Let's start with an advisory vote from Youth Councilor Nog.
Yes.
And Council President Lube.
Aye.
I couldn't even hear that. Did she say? Oh, aye. Okay. Thank you. And then everyone present in City Hall, if you are supportive, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? All right. Resolution number 22-27 is adopted unanimously. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you.
Forgot to put the name time back, actually.
All right. We'll move on to item number 9, which is a discussion of preferred approach to climate-friendly and equitable communities parking rules compliance. Senior Planner Warren, good to see you.
Good to see you all. Good evening, Mayor Snyder and members of the City Council. My name is Skylar Warren, Senior Planner in the Department of Community Development. I'm here tonight to follow up on my presentation to you on September 6th regarding the parking reforms required by the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities rulemaking. From this point forward, I'm going to refer to this set of rules and the required work program collectively as CFEC throughout the presentation to make things a little easier. But I will remind everyone in my wrap-up what the CFEC stands for here. Tonight we will be presenting the Tigard team's recommendation to you and asking for your direction on moving forward with that recommendation or one of the alternatives. As I mentioned in the earlier presentation, this is a time-constrained project with two deadlines quickly approaching, one on December 31st of this year and one on June 30th of 2023. So we're hoping to get to work on this project as soon as possible. Next slide. So the two areas of the CFEC rules that are subject to these short deadlines are both related to off-street motor vehicle parking. The first is a requirement that the city reform its development code standards related to minimum parking requirements. These are standards in the development code that require development to provide a minimum number of parking spaces based on use classification of that development. The city has some limited choice in how to reform those standards. And then secondly, we must update the standards for the design of parking lots. There is no choice on this one, and it will mean that we must require more tree canopy or solar covers over parking lots, as well as electric vehicle readiness. Next slide. For the minimum parking requirement reform, this chart summarizes the three options that the city has before it. The first, path one, is to remove all minimum parking requirements in the code. If this path is followed, then there are no further steps required in this element. The second, path two, removes all minimum parking requirements in a large part of the city. In addition, parking requirements would be removed for certain types of development, including middle housing, affordable housing, shelters, assisted living facilities, and other types of residential uses. The third, path three, also removes all minimum parking requirements in a large part of the city, but also requires that the city adopt three policies that use pricing signals to change parking and driving behavior. Next slide. The Tigard team's strong recommendation is to follow path one to compliance. This option would remove minimum parking requirements from the development code entirely. There are several reasons this is our recommendation. We have presented to the Tigard Transportation Advisory Committee and the Planning Commission and had some great discussions with those bodies. We received support for the recommended approach from both. In addition, we had a few community members testify during the Tigard Transportation Advisory Committee meeting in support of following path one to remove minimum parking requirements. This approach also aligns with adopted city policies, including the strategic vision and the strategic plan. Reducing burdensome minimum parking requirements fosters a well-connected and accessible pedestrian network, facilitates transit-oriented development, increases sustainability, and lowers the impact of development, and reduces climate impacts. This is also in line with the council goal to increase community resiliency. Further, Path 1 greatly simplifies the development code standards for applicants seeking to create more housing and jobs within the city. A unified, citywide approach to parking reform is preferable to one that inequitably applies parking reforms here and there. Next, by removing minimum parking requirements, the city allows the market to respond to supply and demand, specific site contexts, their intended customers, and future innovations in mobility. Finally, removing minimum parking requirements means that land is used more efficiently and less developments are overparked. Next slide. So those are all the positives to Path 1, and I think that our recommendation could easily rest on just those positives, but I do want to provide some more background on the other path alternatives that highlight the reasons we are not recommending those options. The first and primary reason is that our analysis shows that paths 2 and 3 will result in the removal of minimum parking requirements in most of the city anyway. Fully 62% of the city will have no minimum parking requirements under those alternatives. And that analysis is in line with the analyses conducted by staff in both Milwaukee and Beaverton. That 62% of the city that will have no minimum parking requirements under paths 2 or 3 includes almost all of the city's commercial, industrial, and mixed-use zones. The remaining 38% of the city where we would have the discretion to apply minimum parking requirements is almost exclusively low-density residential. However, even within those areas, the city's authority would extend to only a limited number of development types. As I said before, most of the middle housing types, as well as affordable housing, assisted living facilities, shelters, schools, ADUs, duplexes, triplexes, and many others would be exempt from parking requirements. The code to implement all of these exemptions and apply minimum parking requirements to only a select few development types in a very limited geography of the city would create an overly burdensome and complex code that would move us away from our work over the past decade to streamline and simplify the code. For Path 3 in particular, many of the programmatic requirements are untested in cities of Tigard's size. The administrative element of implementing these programs would prove burdensome, not just to the city, but to the property owners and business owners subject to those requirements. Next slide. So I want to quickly provide a visualization of what we mean when we say that 62% of the city will be exempt from minimum parking requirements, no matter which path is chosen. So the city is required to remove all minimum parking requirements in our 2040 centers and in a quarter-mile buffer around them. So that's Washington Square Plan District, Tigard Downtown, Tigard Triangle, a portion of the King City Town Center that extends into Tigard, as well as a portion of Progress Ridge that extends into the city. Next slide. We are also required to remove all minimum parking requirements within 3/4 of a mile of west stations. Next slide. And then we must remove all minimum parking requirements within a 1/2 mile of frequent transit lines as shown here. Next slide. So this is the area with no minimum parking requirements when we put all of those together. Next slide. However, but the quarter-mile around the 2040 centers is superseded beginning in July with a 1/2 mile buffer if paths 2 or 3 are chosen. This further increases the areas where the city cannot apply minimum parking requirements. Next slide. Combining that new buffer with the previous ones gets us to this map. Everything shown in red here will have no minimum parking requirement. This area includes, as I said, all of downtown, the Tigard Triangle, Washington Square, including the MUR, MUC, and MUC zones, all of the heavy industrial zone, most of the light industrial and industrial park zones, and the entirety of the general commercial zone, except for a small section at 99W and Gardy, and at Shoals and 121st. I do have maps showing that if you'd like to see the zoning in the areas that are excluded, but I'll leave that for the question session if it's valuable. So as I said, what is left is almost entirely residential zones in the western portion of Tigard. Next slide. So luckily we do have some local precedents for removing minimum parking requirements to lean on here. The most recent is the Tigard Triangle, where the Lean Code adopted in 2017 removed parking requirements altogether. Since then, we have seen the development potential of the Triangle unlocked, with construction of new commercial and housing units proceeding rapidly. Notably, each of these developments is providing parking without any city requirement to do so. Our analysis of the development that has happened in the Triangle shows that recent developments are including parking counts that are just slightly below what would have been required under the old code. We've also seen development get creative with shared parking agreements that reduce underutilized parking lots. This, of course, all moves our urban form closer to the walkable development pattern we are encouraging, and it reduces unnecessary expense for developers. Next slide. And parking can be expensive. The typical surface parking space in the Pacific Northwest is about $5,000 to build. That does not account for the ongoing maintenance cost. Structured parking is even more expensive, starting at $20,000 per space and climbing to as high as $50,000 per space. But there are also opportunity costs with excessive parking mandates. A recent study found that in the Pacific Northwest, the average minimum parking requirement for a 2-bedroom apartment is 1.5 spaces. This represents 50% approximately of the square footage of a typical 2-bedroom apartment. In other terms, every 3 required parking spaces displaces the potential for 1 or more dwelling units. Next slide. Right now, we also have a number of cities who are also planning to remove all minimum parking requirements. Just last week, Beaverton's City Council directed staff to follow Path 1. Milwaukee's council did the same earlier this month. And West Linn, Bend, Corvallis, Millersburg, and Portland are all advancing recommendations to do the same. Next slide. But it's not just in Oregon, though, that we're seeing massive parking reform. Cities across the country are increasingly removing minimum parking requirements from their code. Next slide. Following Buffalo, New York's move in 2017 to remove minimum parking requirements, the list has grown exponentially. Cities making these reforms are of all sizes, and parking reform is something that is popular across the political spectrum. Next slide. I'll end on a case study on that first city that I mentioned to adopt that reform, Buffalo. With much more development activity in the years since upon which to base their analysis, 2 academics looked at the outcomes in off-street parking following removal of all minimum parking requirements in Buffalo. Their take-home findings give us an idea of what we can expect by following Path 1. The city saw an overall decrease in off-street parking spaces centered primarily on commercial and mixed-use developments. Those mixed-use developments in transit areas were particularly most likely to see reduced parking counts. And overall, the market in Buffalo has continued to provide off-street parking due to demand. Next slide. And with that, I'm concluding the presentation and can take any questions.
Okay, and just to be clear, the staff recommendation, I guess it's worded as a strong staff recommendation, is Path 1, which is repeal all parking requirements and let the market deal with it.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay.
Correct.
Questions? Councillor Shaw?
Thank you very much, Senior Planner Warren. Excellent presentation, and thank you for synthesizing it too, because I know it was a little more difficult in the past with the presentations. With regards to, this is a mandate from LCDC, so regardless, we'd have to choose Path 1, Path 2, or Path 3, and therefore staff's recommendation Path 1, but regardless, we'd have to choose something that's mandated, correct?
Correct. If the council, the city opted not to choose one of those pathways, Pathway 1 would take effect automatically as of July 1st, 2023.
What about the path of, I mean, there's a bunch of cities suing the state over this, right? Not just about parking, but about the climate friendly, I mean, is that a path too, or you're just?
The most recent word that I have is that no litigation has been filed, although I do know that a number of cities have signed on to litigation, to plan for litigation, I don't know what the end goal is, perhaps get an injunction against the rules taking effect on a certain date.
I mean, I don't know what the end goal is either, but I thought Springfield had filed suit and there were a bunch of cities that had joined, but maybe that's
Springfield,
premature.
Medford, I believe Hillsborough is also signed on, and Sherwood maybe.
I just want to be, to Councillor Shaw's question, if that's a path, we should at least know it.
So, Council, it's my understanding that there is an IGA amongst those cities to pay for retaining an attorney, but there has been no litigation filed yet.
Okay. But I guess something like that would be a path as well. Okay. Councillor Newton?
Thank you, Mr. Warren, and I think Path 1's the way to go myself. In my history with the city, I only noticed 2 real issues with parking that I heard about. Number 1 was multifamily projects where people said there wasn't enough parking and it would spill into the neighborhood public streets. But I know this doesn't address that really, but that continues to be a concern in some neighborhoods, I think. You don't hear about it usually in single family. The other question that came up was my brother-in-law uses a handicap accessible van where he actually needs to lower a ramp. And so a lot of times in commercial areas, he's sort of stymied. In Portland, it works because the blocks are short and he can usually find an empty parking space and just go right onto the sidewalk. But I just am thinking we need to be mindful about how we accommodate handicap spaces under this kind of a scenario where, you know, we aren't necessarily requiring them maybe, or maybe we are, but that might be an issue.
Or might they need to be
Yeah,
located
might need
in
to
a
be
public,
addressed somehow.
public
he's
space?
Yeah, he was pretty creative. He figures it out, but sometimes there's handicap spots, but they don't have the space for it to lower the ramp. And then the last thing, I know we're addressing the downtown parking issues that sometimes come up with a downtown parking study. So I guess my question to you there is, will that kind of be addressed separately? That's not a parking requirement issue, that's a time issue, is that correct? How long people, how we work parking in the downtown? Thanks.
Yes, so it's difficult to sort of parse these things out because off-street parking is, of course, connected to on-street parking in some manner. But the rules don't contemplate a curbside management program like metering or district parking, except insofar as there is in Path 2 a requirement to actually do curbside management in your 2040 centers. So that's, I didn't get into the details of that, but one of the additional elements of Path 2 is that you actually have to do the curbside management in the 2040 centers.
All right, Councilor Shaw?
Thank you. So this would not preclude, let's say, if it was determined through a parking study for downtown, additional parking, maybe even a 2 or 3 story parking structure would need to be built. Would this preclude that?
No. Nothing in these rules would affect the building of a parking structure, although it's important to note that Metro, through the Urban Growth Management Functional Plan, has had for a number of years established parking maximums that are applied to uses across the city, and it's usually a little bit different based on proximity to transit. For that type of parking structure, which if it's not associated with a primary use, I don't know exactly how the parking maximums would apply in that case, but you know, it's possible that there could be some limit.
But that's not affected by the decision tonight.
Correct. That's not affected by the decision tonight.
Anything else? Councilor Goodhouse.
I have a couple questions and comments, but back to City Attorney Orr. What's the reason behind the suit or the IGA from the other cities? What are they? What is the foundation of the IGA to?
What are they contemplating?
Yeah,
Yes.
so the IGA is just to pay for attorney services. So it's selecting a law firm to represent the cities.
But is it with the parking or the overall? What is the end goal though for the reason why the cities are not moving forward and suing?
Yeah, I believe Mr. Warren has more context about that.
I honestly don't know what the end goal of litigation would be. I assume that in consultation with their counsel, they would determine what a potential pathway forward was, that where they might have some sort of case to present. I'm not privy to those conversations, so I'm not really sure.
They don't like all the rules of being told what they have to do or can't do.
I think the IGA also includes services for a public relations firm, so I don't know if that's also sort of factored into the goals of the suit itself for the litigation, but that's what I know.
City attorney's got more, it looks like.
Oh.
Yeah, if I could just add one more thing, is that in talking with the city attorney for Springfield, they still are working towards compliance with the goals while at the same time considering litigation. So I would say it's not necessarily an either or decision for council, but it's a and decision. Litigation and compliance as opposed to litigation or.
All right, Mr. Warren, anything further?
So Assistant Community Development Director McGuire's let me know that he's also heard that some of the cities, I guess, that are parties to that IGA have had concerns about the timeline for the adoption of the rules.
Okay.
So.
That's one of my big concerns with this is, and I know it's something with the League of Oregon Cities, or a lot of cities have, is with home rule and this impeding on home rule as far as cities making their own decisions, timelines, having a discussion or say in this. And that's one of my big concerns is, complying or moving forward with this, then where does, you start slowly eroding home rule as we go down the road. And it's always been part of a community as you elect your officials to make decisions for your community, not have a different entity. One community could have one set of goals and another one have it. And with this, I see it kind of eroding home rule coming in on this one issue. And, something with a shorter timeline, what I see right now with a big issue is we still don't have really an adequate bus service throughout Tigard. We still don't have a good system with sidewalks and bike lanes throughout Tigard. I was just in the Tigard Triangle the other day, and someone was saying, well, when can we get some good sidewalks or something, because they walk up and down 72nd from 99W, and they said there's not really any really safe or adequate way through there. So when we're looking at something doing this, so many people do drive their vehicles, and we're looking at the areas of the Triangle and downtown Tigard where already there's parking problems. So if we start looking at this and we don't have adequate services to do it, it doesn't seem like it's really hand in hand taking care of the issue. It looks like we're putting more restrictions. We're basically not having as many options, but then we don't have anything for people to ride a bus, or we don't have people to get around. And so those are really a lot of my concerns, is that this doesn't really take into those other accounts of how to provide those services to people. And I know we had a conversation too when I met with some of the staff, is that I see this leading to needing a parking structure in those areas, and how are we going to really plan to build those or to provide it, especially in the downtown area. We have a plaza we're looking at. We're going to have a lot more traffic, a lot more people coming through, and there's a big concern with Ava Rosary going in there, is where all those people are going to park. So I still see a big concern that we're not really having a solution, and do we need more of a timeline to also make sure that we have a solution for a lot of these problems this is going to create.
Councilor Goodhouse, I just want to make sure, do you think path 1, 2, or 3, or any of them, make that problem worse? And if so, can you explain the nexus? Because I'm not tracking that completely. I don't know about others, but
I think if we don't have any minimums in certain areas, or we don't have a solution when we build this. I mean, a lot of times I think we build sometime, or we hope that someone are going to take more transit, and they don't, or they're going to take more bike lanes, but people can't get around. So if we don't have any plan on how to implement that, to have more bus service, or have more sidewalks, or have more bike lanes to get around, we're not also having a plan at the same time to look at. So without really making an option 1, 2, or 3, how do we know based on if we don't have a plan to take care of the needs? So that's where it's almost.
So what path do you propose? I'm just wanting to make sure everybody's understanding where you're going with it, because home rule was already eroded when this rule was put into place by the legislature, in my mind. I mean, I hear you saying if we make one of these choices, we're eroding home rule, but they already did it. Unless we're just saying we're not going to comply with it, but that's not really a strategy, I don't think.
No, I don't think that.
So what are you proposing, just so we're clear?
I mean, I propose a plan that's going to meet or take care of the needs that, by not having a minimum and having less parking, what do we have in place to take care of it for more transit, more in the areas we need it, more the bike lanes and the sidewalks? What are we going to do to solve that problem, rather than saying, well, someday we'll fix it? Well, that's what we always get into the problem of. If someday we'll take care of it or something, we'll have it, but we're already having parking problems with no parking structure. We're still not on TriMet to have more bus service, and we still have many areas in the triangle where we've passed affordable housing, but we still haven't put in place the sidewalks to get around.
So generally speaking, you're thinking the market will not take care of the parking?
No, I don't. The market's not going to take care of it, and it's going to fall on us, and we don't have a plan, and we can't just say that, you know, all we're going to do as a city is we're going to hear more and more from our residents, our businesses, that there's not parking.
Does the evidence support that? I mean, you presented a number of, I think, research-based pieces of information that would sort of counter that. Is that accurate?
So generally what we know is that in areas where minimum parking requirements are removed from development codes, that developers continue to provide parking because their customers demand it. Whether, you know, if you're, say, a Costco, you're not going to build a Costco and not have parking because you're not going to sell very many Costco-sized things. Similarly, for people who are buying homes at the other end of the development spectrum, so single detached houses, we only require in the city of Tigard 1 parking space per single detached house. What we see generally is that even with that low minimum, developers are generally building at least 2 off-street parking spaces for every single detached house, to the tune of about 75% of the new houses built that we see come in. They actually have 2.
And that's because the market's demanding it.
This is the market providing something above and beyond what the code would even require. So, you know, most developers and their financiers, I think, are responsive to what the market would bear, because otherwise their product is not, you know, sellable or rentable or refinanceable in some cases.
Well, to clarify on that, though, I mean, you're giving a reference for a Costco, so of course they're gonna have the spaces they need for people, and you're talking about residential, where obviously they're gonna have the off-street parking or so forth. But what are you gonna do with the mixed-use areas, like the downtown or the triangle? Is it gonna eventually lead to a downtown situation where the city will have to build a parking structure to accommodate for all the parking that's needed?
So I think the city building a parking structure is a separate sort of policy decision that the council could consider at some point. I don't think that removing parking minimums in downtown, for example, would necessarily lead to the city to have to build a parking structure, although certainly that's an option that is before the council at any point. But it's also worth noting that the downtown right now has no minimum parking requirements for Main Street, and in path 1, 2, and 3, there would be no minimum parking requirements. So in some sense it's status quo, but it's also, you know, we don't have an option to move away from the status quo of no minimum parking requirements on Main Street and downtown. So you know, one other thing about parking structures is they do result in if it's city built, it's the city intervening in the market, and so now you're creating more supply, which for developers might actually encourage them to build less, because now there's an increased supply of parking on the market that their customers,
that they didn't have to pay for.
That they didn't have to pay for.
Okay, I'm going to just quickly, in the interest of time, Councillor Newton, you've already said you're in favor of path 1. Youth Councillor Nog, where would you recommend we be? Okay, and Councillor Shaw?
Path 1, and afterwards kind of make a small clarification.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm going to continue the conversation. I just want to get where everybody's at. Council President Lube, where are you at?
Path 1.
Okay, and Councillor Goodhouse?
I'm still curious about why the other cities are not signing on to it, and why if there's more getting together.
Okay, so you're not a path 1, 2, or 3, you're another path.
Yeah.
Or another choice at this point. Is that right? Okay. All right, Councillor Shaw, you had a question or comment?
Oh, just clarity. It wasn't the legislature that actually passes because they had discussed it. They couldn't come to a resolution, so the governor put it in her executive order, and then therefore it went through a rulemaking process.
Oh, and the rulemaking with DLCD.
Yeah, which is
yeah.
Okay, but just clarity.
Yeah, no, I
Same
appreciate,
effect.
I appreciate that clarification. And I love it when the legislature does that. Like, we literally couldn't figure it out, so you guys all figure it out. Okay, anything else further? It seems like we've got a really strong preference towards path one. Are you looking for a vote, or you just need to know direction tonight?
Direction is great, and I'd leave it to your discretion as to how it's best to provide that. You know, I'm happy with, you know, rough consensus, but if it pleases the council to take a vote, that works as well.
Well, I think I guess I haven't spoken specifically about my own personal thoughts on this yet, just as I've been facilitating, but I think this is a really good example of where the market takes care of itself, and over-regulation over decades has created unintended consequences. And for that reason, I'm in favor of path one as well. It seems like we have everybody except Councillor Goodhouse in favor of path one. So I don't know how much more discussion or direction we need to have. Councillor Shaw?
I'm wondering if we move forward with path one, but perhaps we can, as a council, be updated on what litigation, if it does move forward, as a compromise for Councillor Goodhouse.
I don't know how much we'll get if we're not a party to it, but I guess we'll certainly know what's happening in the public, but can we be updated on that as it progresses? Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Do we need to discuss it any further, or do you feel like you've got direction?
I feel like I've got the direction I need.
Okay. We'll move on to item 10 was moved to the 11th. So we'll move on to non-agenda items, which we did not have. Administrative report, City Manager Reimer.
Thank you, Mayor and councilors. Thanks for a good meeting this evening. I'm going to provide you a reduced update. Thanks to the team, though, for a variety of things. I'll share those in my update this week in writing. But we do have breaking news, actually, of today. Clean Water Services has reopened the Faneuil Creek Trail at Shoals Ferry Road. So this is a project that the council's probably very familiar with. One that Clean Water Services went out to bid twice. First time they didn't receive any bids. Second time, bids came in over budget, so kept delaying it. And to their credit, they ended up doing the project with their in-house team. And it just reopened today, learned from our city engineer. So great news and great for our mobility and connectivity for our community. And
does that mean the project's done?
At least that portion. I'd have to
Okay.
follow up on other parts, but that is open, and it's an area that obviously we've had significant issues with for many years. So following up on our charter review, the first thing is our Tigard Library teammates celebrated Constitution Week, and we took advantage of that opportunity to obviously talk about the Constitution, but also to talk about our charter review and what the charter is and the Charter Review Committee. And so we have used that to try to attract and make the community aware of this. And to date, we have now 7 applicants. I reported last week 6. We now have 7. We have 3 more weeks of open recruitment, and we also have the materials available in Spanish as well for our community. So we're continuing trying to actively promote that, and to date, we have 7 applicants. So I think that's a really good response in just starting this. You would have learned about this in Kenny's update that we just moved to next week, but Downtown Reimagined is continuing our work, and community engagement liaisons will be hosting a Spanish-speaking focus group tomorrow from 5:30 to 7. This is our 3rd focus group to be held. The first was hosted in Arabic, and the second was in Chinese and Vietnamese. And so these focus groups are to really learn on how and why communities use our downtown, and then ultimately the same prompts for focus groups are being used on our website, on our website as well, to try to gather additional information. On the 11th, you'll learn more from Kenny about Downtown Reimagined and the project update, but we thought that was important to provide you that tonight. And then 2 more quick ones. We talked about our monthly Ivy pool at Cook Park. We just had that. We had 17 volunteers from Troops 419 and Troop 5419. The next one will be on October 30th. And last but not least, I know this has been something that in my time here has been wanted. The Youth Advisory Council met in person last week for the first time in 2+ years, and there's a lot of excitement in this room. There was in that room as well. And we had 18 youth in attendance, and the committee is now working on a number of volunteer and engagement activities for this fall. And so just appreciate our youth being leaders in our community. And that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
All right, thank you, City Manager Reimer. We have no executive session scheduled. Is there a motion for adjournment?
I move to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded twice. All in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And Council President Lube will make you vote officially.
Aye.
Okay. We are adjourned. Good night, Tigard.